going to start off with the definition of stress is a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mentally tension and may be a factor in disease causation. So you guys hit basically all those with how it affects you. So now I wanted to see if you guys felt any different about children. What kind of things do you notice stress out the children in your classroom?
They act out.
They act out.
What makes them stressed out?
Yes, like the
I
triggers.
I think the change in routine, like if their families are traveling,
Okay.
or if they don't know who's picking them up, or
Sure.
what kind of going on.
Not having the routine
Okay.
as well.
Yes.
Maybe they're not feeling well. They had a lack of sleep the night before.
I was gonna say that too.
Yeah, lack of sleep. Have you guys ever dealt with any kids who've had any like kind of severe trauma, like any like abuse or neglect, or like a death of a parent?
I think families that have someone that, like in their family, a sibling or a parent or relative that has like a disability or a disease.
Yes, definitely. Okay. So how, I know we said acting out, what are some of the other ways you see how this affects how they behave and just kind of their general demeanor and such?
You could be withdrawn.
Withdrawn,
Angry.
angry,
Physical.
Anxious.
anxious. All right, well, that was awesome. Thank you guys for participating. So yeah, you guys kind of nailed all the 4 main categories that have been being identified with stress. The first is family problems, then there's also cultural differences and health and developmental issues, and then just general environment can be a big trigger. Starting with family problems, a lot of the times it's family separation and divorce, moving, abuse and neglect is obviously one of the really traumatic ones. Financial difficulties at home is something that children are feeling as well. And then struggles with other family members like disease or disability or mental health issues and behavior. Cultural differences is language barriers, and maybe some children are feeling isolation because they're not feeling as if they fit in as far as with their classmates or society or just some of the norms that they see. Lack of representation, it's hard for children to find someone that they can relate to when they're not in that social norm. And then also different family practices as far as holidays that are celebrated that maybe they don't participate in, or when their holiday is being celebrated. Family dynamics sometimes can be different depending on culture. And then diet, religion, all kinds of things that maybe it's hard for them to get that kind of support that they need. Health and developmental, chronic illnesses are something that are very stressful and kind of follow children along through their development. Disabilities, developmental delays, behavioral health disorders, side effects of medicine, and then any kind of mental health concerns. Sometimes you see that starting even early. Environment can be a very big one. Some children who are growing up in dangerous neighborhoods, it's kind of hard for them to focus on anything as far as their development if they don't feel safe in their home. Disturbances as far as if they're living in apartment buildings that are really busy or just have a lot of other things going on. Comforts and basic needs as far as if some children don't even have a bed or know where their meal is coming from. Distance as far as traveling to school, and if they're home or even if their classroom or wherever they're at, if there's a lot of chaos there, that can be something that's really stressful. School is becoming a huge stress for children, not necessarily in childcare centers, but with the whole standards movement and standardized testing. A lot of pressure is being put on children from kindergarten to third grade as far as early childhood goes, which is, it's starting to have its negative effects. And then media, as far as what children are seeing on TV and tablets and things that they're exposed to. I mean, even the news, I think sometimes when I have the news on with my daughter, I'm like, she's 3, and she'll start talking about what they're talking about, and I can tell it's stressing her out a little, and she has these questions for me that just don't feel age appropriate. So the developmental domains when under stress, it's important to remember that each domain, it can affect the other domain. So if a child's physically sick and is tired from that, that's going to be really hard for them to be social, and that's going to affect the social domain. And then it can kind of just domino effect into cognitive. They're not going to want to sit there and process anything. And language, especially the little ones, if they're tired, they're just going to want to sleep. If they're not feeling well, they're not going to be hearing or developing any language skills. So to start off with the domains, I wanted to talk a little bit about sensory motor. The sensory motor domain is at risk for delays because of stress. Children may be experiencing extreme fatigue, ailments, a lack of energy or motivation, and pain. When these symptoms of stress are shadowing a child, it's hard for them to focus or participate in their natural development. For social emotional, the most associated domain with stress and development, children may become shy or withdrawn, and there's studies showing that the children who are withdrawing are showing the highest levels of cortisol, which is chemical that your brain produces when you're feeling extremely stressed and you're having a fight or flight response. Children may act out or exhibit challenging behaviors. They do not have the proper coping skills and tools to deal with trauma or stress in early childhood development. Language is another part of development that is most rapidly growing in the early years. When exposed to toxic stress, children go into flight or fight, as I was saying, and this extreme reaction produces cortisol and the physical reaction in the brain that takes over. Things like language development become a backseat to whatever is threatening the child. This is especially stressful for dual language learners who are already trying to balance 2 languages. So when they have other stress going on, it can be very hard for them to learn any language skills. Cognitive is also a very hard thing to process when you're dealing with a bunch of stress. Nearly all childhood theorists like Piaget, Erikson, Vygotsky, Maria Montessori, they all place an importance on cognitive development and the processing information in the early years of life. And excessive stress disrupts this connection and a child's ability to properly process information in a developmentally appropriate way. Studies have shown even stress during prenatal periods can have negative long-term effects. There can be short-term effects like premature birth, but a lot of these children are prone to anxiety and depression. There's even one study out about how children whose mothers were under traumatic stress while they were pregnant, their children are prone more to drug addiction later on in life. The most rapid brain development is happening in those first 3 years, and stress can actually physically change the architecture of a child's brain. So cortisol levels of children in ECEC programs are on the rise. This is a video I was going to show, but it's a little long, so I'm just going to sum it up a little bit. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris is a pediatrician who is kind of heading this cause about stress and its effects on child's development. She has a TED Talks about it, and she's done a lot of studies that are showing some really alarming statistics as far as health and stress and how children's health are, like, especially once they're getting into adolescence and then into adulthood, is rapidly declining. I think she said that there's even I'm not sure what her statistics are behind this, but she was saying that traumatic stress can take 20 years off of a child's life in the long term. So if you ever get a chance to check her out, she's really interesting and definitely somebody who I think is up and coming with this movement. How can educators help? First, recognizing the problem, identifying symptoms, investigating a little bit. Obviously, you want to keep your boundaries, but like just kind of figuring out what's going on with the kids in your class. If you think something might be going on, you're probably right. Teachers seem to know children just as well as the parents sometimes. Mindfulness is especially helpful when you're talking about cultural diversity and just making sure that every child feels represented in the class, making sure every child feels safe. If you know what's going on with them and you know that you can provide some comforts at school, it could become a place of not stress for them, which kind of can help at least give them some time away from it. Family partnership is key when it's possible. Obviously, if there's cases like abuse and neglect and the parents are uncooperative, or maybe there's an investigation going on, that might not be something that you would pursue. But when you can, talk with a parent and you can get a parent to kind of acknowledge what you're seeing as well. That's the best case scenario. Observation and assessment. Keeping consistent and accurate assessments on a regular basis is huge because it allows you to right away notice any red flags and then kind of filter in what could be causing those red flags. Support, especially just like being comforting to the child and just reaching out and just being somebody that they can count on. And then also, lastly, modeling is huge. So obviously you don't want to bring all your stress to work and from home or things like that, but if there's like a situation that arises in the classroom where something comes up and it's a little stressful, instead of just hiding it and like dealing with it on your own, it's good to start using the vocabulary words that you might be using to help them learn the skills to cope with any kind of, just even little things like lunch was like late or something like that. So in conclusion, stress, especially toxic stress, can have tremendous negative effects on a child's overall development, and early intervention from adults is crucial, especially teachers. And then lastly, you guys are one of the first offense, well, all teachers are the first offense for children, especially when their parents aren't able to be. So it's great when we can have advocacy and action. And that is it. Any questions?